Hi, this is Lady C.
Hey, and this is JT.
Welcome to The Critical Thought. In the upcoming episode, we're going to be talking to an individual that was not a born in, and no, he was not raised in, but he came in as an adult to the Jehovah's Witness religion. And he's going to tell you all about the series of events and how he became connected with the Jehovah's Witnesses.
You're listening to The Critical Thought, where we challenge our listeners to use critical thinking when examining the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses.
So I want to welcome Dave Wicklund.
Well, I'm glad to be here, guys. It's an awesome opportunity to convey my story.
Yes, it's really good to finally put a face with the comments.
Yeah, and we think everyone's going to enjoy, especially some of the points that you're going to highlight about what your personal experiences have been being involved with the witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dave, you want to tell us about how you got connected with Jehovah's Witnesses or learned about this group?
Yeah, I was first in grade school. I did have a classmate, unknowingly, who was a Jehovah's Witness. But especially when I was a teenager, I came into contact with Jehovah's Witnesses when I was on my way home from school one day, 1989, junior in high school. And it was a gentleman from the Arab congregation, or Arabic group. They've got a lot of different groups within Chicago JW congregations. And we struck up a conversation after I got off the bus. I can't remember exactly what sparked it, but we started talking about world conditions and paradise and, a more ideal place to live and so forth. And I eventually invited him over for what they term as a Bible study. And I had made mention that, I had familiarity slightly with witnesses, past classmate, that I really didn't know he was deeply involved with witnesses, as in, raised around, because he didn't talk about it much. But what little I did know, I conveyed to him, and then we sat down and we had one study out of the You Can Live Forever in Paradise on Earth book. Him and a friend, one of the other JWs, came over, and we had that one initial study. And then I actually had it where I was very uncomfortable with the way he was communicating with me in the study. And when I picked up on this, it really kind of drew an initial line in the sand at that point, at least with me personally and him, to where when he returned a week later, I had already told my mom that, I had studied with him, but I wasn't exactly like clicking with him. I didn't want to be rude with him, but she went into mother bear mode. And when he came to the door, she literally took the Paradise book and like threw it at him. And I was looking from the background. I was like, oh my goodness, Mom, you didn't have to do like that. So that was my initial contact in 1989. And I graduated high school in 1990. I hadn't had any contact with any other witnesses that I knew of. I started working at a convenience store. I was going to college, junior college, trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life. I was kind of one of those people that didn't really know what my pathway or avenue was, or what my passion was to, going forward in the future. And on top of that, when growing up, my mom had been battling cancer on and off for basically since 1980. So in and out of remission, chemotherapy, and then back, to normal, and then the same cycle continued. So by 1992, still working at that convenience store, and there's this young lady that used to come in to the store a couple times a week. She would usually buy like a 40 ounce. She was real nice, real quiet, not like typical social butterfly, kind of standoffish. And one day after she left, about 15 minutes later, she called me up at the store, and she basically was flirting with me and asking, oh, are you that cute guy at the door or at the store? So she basically asked me out, and we went out on a date to the mall. She drove, went there, went back. She hadn't told me anything about being a Jehovah's Witness up to this point. So I had kissed her goodnight. A couple days went by. I actually called her back up, and she was like a totally different person when talking with her the second time. She was like, Dave, to be honest with you, I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I guess we really aren't supposed to date. And I started probing questions because I was fascinated, and I was like, well, you guys don't celebrate Christmas, right? He was like, no, we don't celebrate holidays. Or and I started asking her, well, yeah, on Christmas, what's the purpose of Santa Claus? And she was like, yeah, we don't get involved in what we believe are pagan type of activities. And I asked her about Easter. Why do you worship a false Mary that looks like Mona Lisa? I got that out of a rap song I listened to at one point, and questioned her. And she said, well, we don't celebrate that, but we do celebrate the memorial of Jesus' death, which had just happened at that time in 1992. And then she basically went on to invite me to the Kingdom Hall. And the first meeting I attended was May 21st of 1992. And yeah, I was attracted to her. I admit, I was 20, she was 25. It was kind of flattering to get that attention from an older woman. And at the same time, though, my mom was sick. I was trying to figure out, as a young single only child, what to do with my life, and was kind of lost for direction in some ways. And the narrative that was starting to be spun to me, it seemed to have what they used to call the ring of truth, certain aspects of it at least. And when I went to the Kingdom Hall, I was actually very impressed by the way people were. It had given me a different perception than what perception I had because I had heard different things. Oh, they're a sect. They're kind of dangerous, but people were friendly and nice and super jovial. And I didn't know that was called love bombing in some circles, but that's what I was initially exposed to, and gave me the impression that these are really good people. And I started immediately coming to meetings there, basically in the spring and summer of 1992. That's how I initiated contact and kind of got the ball rolling with the witnesses.
Wow. Let me ask you a question. What was your basic religious background? I mean, were your mom and y'all guys going to church? Y'all belonged to any church before you were introduced to the witnesses?
I had gone to a Lutheran school for a couple of years. I had, at that point in time, really committed myself to any type of religion, and I had visited different churches, like a Unitarian church, several in the neighborhood, but nothing formalistic. I hadn't assigned, a religious affiliation. They did baptize me when I was really young, from what I understand, into Unitarian church, but yet I went to kindergarten and for part of a year of high school at a Lutheran high school. But I didn't really subscribe to those belief systems, and a lot of it just didn't make sense to me. Certain doctrines that they taught, Trinity, or certain aspects of what I learned just from growing up at that point and kind of researched, it didn't make sense in logistics to me.
Yeah. When I was growing up as a kid, in my young adulthood, we used to refer to certain types of religions as weak religions. Lutherans, Presbyterians. Those religions weren't really diehard religious based background, strong Bible preachers. And so, as witnesses, we just literally just used to run over people who were in those denominations many times. Unlike perhaps some of the apostolic type faiths, you would be challenged at least with the Bible at the door. But people who came from those type of Methodists, they typically had very, very little knowledge of the Bible. And for a witness, that's game on. That's really game on.
Yeah. So, Dave, how did the love bombing continue? Because I remember you telling your story, and you talked about how the effect this religion had on you after your mother passed.
Well, it wasn't even a month later. that my mom was back in the hospital, severely sick. I remember my dad carrying, basically, handling her to the car, and the cancer had come back and jumped into her bones. And July 18th of 1992, she passed away. Again, this was 28 days after I went to my first Kingdom Hall meeting. So you know what I was primed for at that point, and I actually took to it headlong. The resurrection hope, the paradise hope to see my mom again. After all my mom had suffered through 10, 11, 12 years, it was agonizing. And I'm an only child and somewhat of an introvert, even though I had my circle of friends, that I grew up with. It was very difficult to deal with. And, some of us, our makeups, our personality sensitivities are just such that it kind of puts us in a position where we can be, primed for this in susceptible and vulnerable situations like this. So I wanted a hope. I mean, I wanted that security, that peace. It's only a natural thing that we all want to not lose our loved ones, right? And it wound up being where that is one of the hooks and anchors that really pulled me towards, the hope through Jehovah's Witnesses, and then gradually through the organization and what it teaches. And that's how the gradual enmeshment and entrapment process really took hold on me.
Dave, and I think you mentioned that in other comments, the organization takes advantage of people like that. In fact, one of the scriptures that we would often refer to, how that when we go out in field service or when we're out in the ministry, we're looking for certain types of people. And I remember so many circuit overseers, they would often say, well, brothers, we're not looking for everybody. We're only looking for certain types of people. And those are the people who are moaning and groaning over the detestable things going. And so basically, we're looking for people at their lowest point.
And yeah, Dave, you had mentioned that their hope of resurrection and all that kind of stuff sounded so good to you. And you were in the middle of this love bombing phase. So what other things did the Jehovah's Witnesses do at the time when your mother passed?
Well, they actually came to my mom's wake, which was surprising how they showed up. They even brought some of those tracts, What Hope for Dead Loved Ones, one of them did. I interpreted it as just, out of kindness and respect. Here they barely knew me, only 27 days since the first time they met me, and they show up, and it seemed to me like it was coming across that it was kindness, loving, genuine concern. That's the way I perceived it. And I had a couple of other friends that were there, non-Jehovah's Witnesses, that they kind of noticed them, and they even impressed them as far as how they comported themselves. We had this view of JWs before, and this kind of modifies the view a little bit, just in how they were comporting themselves towards me. So that was one of the things right there initially, and that, again, springboarded me into the Bible study, or books, Watchtower study that they had, and continued to perpetuate, what subject matter I was studying, through the Live Forever book, whether it was on hellfire or lack thereof, or heaven and how many people go to heaven, different doctrines that Watchtower, traditionally has taught for many, many decades now.
Yeah,
Dave,
and you know what, Dave, and you know what, too, Dave. You had mentioned that you had studied with these two brothers previous. Did you ever think about them when you were getting back into this studying and stuff like that? Because, your mom told them, "We don't want you here." Now, all of a sudden, you're being introduced to this group in a different way. Did you ever cross paths with those brothers again?
I did the Arabic brother because he was in the same circuit, as it turns out. I saw him at the convention upcoming that I went to, And he was surprised to see me naturally, and basically said, "I knew something. There was something about you, David. That was attractive. Kind of a thing." And that was basically, the relationship I had with him was from a distance, because he was in a totally different congregation. The study that I had with somebody going forward from 1992 was with somebody locally, on a totally different scale. So, but yeah, that it did cross my mind.
Wow. And then how long did it take you to get baptized after all of these series of events was taking place?
Almost 2 years. I baptized May 21st of 1994, and that was the same month, in fact, the same weekend that actually we were passing out those Awake magazines that were advertising the children of Jehovah's Witnesses that had been martyred or kept their integrity due to the blood doctrine, as was thought of that time in 1994. Believe it or not.
Mhm.
And that was something else at the time I had taken to quite strongly, taken the blood card and so forth, and bought into the narrative. There was a brochure that they had entitled "How Can Blood Save Your Life?" And that actually, it had all kinds of quotes from supposedly Journal of American Medical Association and different medical professionals that they used cherry picking wise to fit their narrative on the blood doctrine. And it was right at that time I actually got baptized, pre-internet.
Wow,
Wow.
that is amazing. And then what happened to this young lady that you were dating?
She actually gradually stopped going to meetings. She had revealed to me in conversation right before I became an unbaptized publisher, I think it was, that she was like, "Be careful around certain brothers, because some of them are a little more, coarse and callous." Because I was starting to notice some of the personalities and idiosyncrasies some had. She revealed that the one that happened to be the presiding overseer actually called her a bitch, and I was like, "What, him?" And she was, I could tell she was like really like devastated, just in conveying this to me. But it was almost like a red flag to be careful of certain individuals in the congregation. And she started to basically either go to a different meeting, different hall. And I found out by the time I was baptized, shortly thereafter, she had stopped going to meetings altogether. And it wound up being about 20 years before I had contact with her again. So no relationship ensued with her as far as romantic or thereabouts. My mindset shifted to being much more serious Jehovah's Witness by that point. Obviously, going to the point of getting baptized even a year before, when I was an unbaptized publisher. I was running up and down the stairs of some of these high rises in Chicago and showing my dedication and giving talks on a theocratic ministry school and, doing the typical advancement that was done at that time there in the early to mid 90s.
So basically, you became the Watchtower's version of a high value man, single man.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Yeah,
On track. A
that's
spiritual
it.
rocket.
He's going places. That's exactly right. So
Amazing.
yeah, it really is. So the congregation that you were a part of, was it basically an interracial congregation for the most part?
Very diverse. Yeah, we had brothers and sisters from Africa, from Ghana, from Nigeria, a Haitian group, a French group. In our hall, we had 4 English-speaking congregations and 1 Spanish congregation. Later, we had a Bosnian group, a Russian group. So, and some of them would come to our meeting just for the regular meeting, and then later, like in the nighttime, have their own meeting. So, yeah, a true diversity. Where I grew up at kind of reflected that. It was like a United Nations of everybody from all backgrounds, grade school, high school. So the congregation, I I would say maybe 30% African American, and just a convergence mix of everybody else. 20% Caucasian, 20%. You had some Asian as well. So a couple of the elders were second generation Jehovah's Witnesses who were of Japanese origin. So as diverse as you can get.
Yeah, it's a very diverse congregation. Yeah, that's the way it was in a lot of the congregations in New York. When I grew up in the Carolinas, it was basically the white. In fact, they had separate congregations when I was a little kid. So, yeah, so in different places you see that, and for a lot of people, that is an attraction because we know, generally speaking, that old saying, 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most divided time in the country because everybody's in their own separate churches many times.
Right. So whatever happened? So you said you got in contact with the Jehovah's Witness that came into the store 20 years later. Was she still a witness and she woke up, or what was the deal?
I reached out to her on Facebook after seeing her, and I hadn't even really gotten into Facebook until mid 2010s. But then when I messaged her, the feeling that I got from her was that she had started going back, or was at least mentally into, still being a Jehovah's Witness. She didn't really reveal whether she goes to meetings or, in fact, it didn't get that far because it got to a point where in a later conversation, I was starting to manifest some concerns when I read about Rutherford and some of the history of the organization. And she kind of just shut down the second conversation that we had. And that was pretty much the end of it. I haven't heard from her since, but that's the way she verbalized it, basically.
So she sounds like she could have been a walkaway believer.
A POMI, as we call it, physically out, mentally in, which
exactly
could be a
right.
lot of out here.
She got affected by the brothers and the way they treated her instead of really looking into seeing what she was a part of. And then she probably didn't even know how to do that.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But what about your as time went on after you got baptized, how did you begin to settle into your new life?
Well, I was single until 1999. So for several years, I regularly went out in field service. I gradually took on more responsibility in the congregation. I worked sometimes full-time jobs, other times part-time jobs. I lived with my dad because he needed assistance. He was in his 60s, heading towards 70. And he was still working quite a bit as an accountant, so I would also assist him with his accounting work. But I would also be in the field service group arrangements on Monday evenings, Thursday evenings. How you put your name on the board so proudly. My name was starting to get all over that board by 1996, 1997 for taking field service groups out. And I was never a full-time pioneer. But I enjoyed the ministry in many cases for what I did. A lot of it was door to door at the time. We did do some old time street work where we'd go to the train stations and so forth, and have our bags of watchtowers and awakes, and start sometimes 6, 7 in the morning, get a couple hours in before the formal field service arrangement, and then it was just kind of like a consistent routine like that from the mid to the late 90s until I met my future wife.
Well, wow. So you really were into it like everybody else, with all the things that you're talking about and going out in service. And I think when you become one of Jehovah's Witnesses, whether you're raised in or born in, this is just the schedule that you
Oh
have.
yeah. Oh yeah.
And
That's
you're
for
so
sure.
busy doing that, you don't have a chance to see all of what you're doing and how you're like that hamster in a wheel. But did you ever finish college when you became one of Jehovah's Witnesses?
No, that went on hold. Some of the literature I had read, even when I was brand new, like I said, I plunged headlong into this and took a lot of this really serious. And they had a new brochure that come out, Jehovah's Witnesses in Education. It had replaced that blue school Jehovah's Witnesses brochure, as I understand. Plus, there was different talks that were given. So they were trying to modify their viewpoint to say, oh, it's okay to get supplementary education, but it's not okay to go all the way, so to speak. You don't need a PhD. We had a district overseer that said PhD stands for Pizza Hut Delivery. It was very confusing, but it seemed like to me, erring on the side of caution and to survive the impending Armageddon, which at that time, we essentially were still under the belief that the generation of 1914 was not going to pass away, 1994, 1995. So I had stopped the junior college, gotten baptized. That year in 1994, I went back to a computer programming and networking school, but the classes were in the evening hours. So I went ahead and started with that, and wow, did I get the fallback on that, because I started having the friends, quote unquote, come up to me, start and say, well, David, you're missing meetings. I had a sister say, the first thing that led so-and-so away was he started missing meetings. So I wound up dropping out of that computer programming networking. And of course, this was pre-internet, 1994, going in 95. And the hardcore perception I got at that time was that the advanced education was frowned upon. So I would have to find a different means to make a living with what's out here. You get a CDL driver's license and, or something in a different field that wouldn't take up my time where I would be missing congregation meetings. And that was probably the hijacker at that time, was for me going to school more than anything else. Because I had elders and servants tell me direct, David, I would get out of there if I were you. Words like that, or phrases like that. And when you're in the organization at that point, baptized, faithful, quote unquote, it's so enthralling and so impactful. A person like me, I took it full throttle when I was 23, 22, 24 years old.
What it sounds like to me is when even though you're not raised in or born in, you're still impressionable. Losing your mother at such a young age, not having someone to kind of guide you where you should go in the future, like how to chart your life when you're kind of coming out of high school.
Exactly. Very much so. I didn't have that guidance and direction like a lot of people have. And because I was kind of an introvert, kind of a little more of a loner, I lacked that. But I did, even when I was studying, I remember I had some colleagues and coworkers at that convenience store, who would say little snippets to me like, Jehovah's Witnesses, you got to be careful about them. Or, a couple of them, they outrightly, use the cult word or so forth. And I, at that time in my vulnerable stage, I took to defending them, because basically it was like, okay, this is what's given me hope. This is what's given me what I thought was security and peace of mind and a mindset of a hope for the future. Whereas the narrative of what was going on in the world, the spin doctrine that the Watchtower does about crime and violence, about the scriptures that we used for describing the last days, that was something that they really had drilled into my head. And yeah, it definitely had an impressionability on me. I had a degree of naivety, I would say, at the time. No question about it.
This is one of Jehovah's Witnesses' most embarrassing things to talk about. And it's interesting how when this conversation about education is brought up, how the typical Jehovah's Witness is trained. I mean, literally trained. When the issue of education comes up, people say higher education. And what they're talking about bachelor degrees, master's degrees, PhDs. That's what they're talking about all the time when they bring up higher education. The way a Jehovah's Witness is trained to spin it is they'll say, well, we can go to trade school. We can get your air conditioning, refrigeration, or get your welder's license and so forth. But people are not talking about that. That's not what they're talking about. And then they'll try to play it off that everybody don't need to go to college. But we're not talking about everybody needs to go to college. We're not talking about any of those things. And when I talk to people, I try to let people know when you're talking to one of Jehovah's Witnesses about education, you have to present it correctly. Because if you don't, they will spin that bad boy to death. What we're talking about is your religion, your faith, your denomination discourages its most talented, brightest, and gifted children from pursuing higher education at the collegiate level. That's what your religion does.
Dave, you had mentioned that during the time that your mother died, you had some friends that were at the wake and they had a different attitude about Jehovah's Witnesses after they saw them. What happened to those friends?
Most of them I lost contact with gradually, just due to the nature of I think the enmeshing culture of Jehovah's Witnesses, the things you learn about, being no part of the world. And as you're going along in the study, you start saying, oh, that's Satan's world. So that means that, and this means this, and this means that we can't have the same relationship with them, or that social dynamic is kind of changed because the Watchtower, or because, what they spun as the Bible says this, the Bible says that. It was a gradual cutting off. One of the ones that actually said that to me was a social worker, a psychologist. She is one that I saw since I was maybe 10, 11, 12 years old. And I used to travel to her home once every week or two. And at the wake, she actually was, given that different impression herself. It didn't mean necessarily she changed her whole view on it, but for her to say that, to me, was like quite an eye opener. As did a couple of other friends that were at the wake. So these types of things you start hearing about. Oh, they want to make a good impression with the world. They want to, their conduct's got to be becoming. They put that up there, in both dress and grooming as well as mannerisms, when they're dealing with the public. And of course, when you're that new around witnesses, not somebody that's, familiar, hadn't grown up with it, you don't know that a lot of that can be potentially a fake or a put upon or designed as a attraction type thing, for, a sales and marketing type of venture, which that's what ultimately, we're taught to do as witnesses, to always be on, 24/7 guard, have our guard up as witnesses. So when you're going into the camp of somebody else that's not a witness to their wake in order to encourage them, it's high time that they make that impression, especially when there's other people around.
Yeah, it's all about the image. It's all about the image.
Right. Now, Dave, what about, did you begin to get into the hierarchy structure, like getting appointed servant elder during the time that you were a Jehovah's Witness?
Yeah, in 1996, we had a major change in our congregation. Basically, most of the elder body was either replaced, or there was something that happened with one of the elders' kids, the presiding overseer I mentioned before, who had called that sister who introduced me to the witnesses the B word. His kids basically all got disfellowship for various reasons. So he obviously couldn't be an elder anymore, and they brought in a couple of new ones that were more, I guess you could say, by the book organizational, and they had meetings with us that were single brothers. We would have maybe once every couple months reminder type meeting after a regular meeting to reach out, for what's opportunities are there. So naturally, they were pushing for ministerial servant, and eventually, I think it was January of 1997, I was appointed a ministerial servant, fitting all the criteria, out in the field service, regular at meetings, taking the quote unquote lead, even though I didn't have a formal position. So, here I go as a single 24-year-old brother.
Wow. So then how long were you a ministerial servant before you woke up from the religion, or, how did that work for you?
I had 2 stints as a single ministerial servant, 1997 until November of 1998. I actually was deleted at that point because I had self-admitted to engaging in, I guess we could say, line crossing with my fiance, my future wife. I had dated her about 10 months at the time, and I wrote a 2-page letter, left it with the accounts box because I was the account servant also, and basically confessed that we had, I guess, engaged in what was called uncleanness, loose conduct. Then they came out with a word I had never heard of before, pornea, and they had brought us to one of the elders' apartment buildings he owned, and we had the judicial committee there initially. And basically, I was put on what they call full restrictions and privately reproved, as was my girlfriend, fiance at the time. So that was the end of my ministerial servant duties as a single man. I later got reappointed as a ministerial servant in 2002 through 2006 and got deleted a second time. That was for the less than 10 hours per month. Had a circuit overseer visit. It was like the honeymoon's over. You're making less than such and such amount of hours, and we can't have that as an example for the congregation. So he hauled me in the back room with the presiding overseer and notified me they were going to make an announcement at the meeting. And sure enough, David Wicklund has been deleted or is no longer a ministerial servant. They read it off just as if a person's disfellowshipped or dissociated. And of course, people turn around and look at you and stare at you and kind of give you the semi-shun treatment sometimes, depending on the individual witness and how they take it.
Yeah, the way they read the letter off is designed to literally destroy your reputation, and it will do it that night. That's for sure.
Oh yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how did they treat you after that? After you got deleted?
Well, the first time in 1998, I wasn't married yet. We were engaged and then eventually did get married, but we had some circle of friends that were very polarizing. There were some that were very supportive. It was kind of a mixed bag. Some that wouldn't even work in field service because they still, when you're on reproof, you could still go out in field service. You can't say the prayer as a brother. A sister actually has to put a head covering on and say the prayer for the group. So it was extremely awkward. And then, of course, we were in engagement status and then looking at getting married, which in May of 1999, we did get married. And that was at Justice of the Peace in Chicago. We decided, it's time to do this. And then the elders wanted to meet with us, even though we were still on this restriction reproof state. And we had another 3-hour meeting with them, literally on our wedding day. I kid you not. Okay. And the end result of that, basically, they wanted to get into the nitty gritty. How far did you go? Did you climax? Did you actually sleep with one another? No, we didn't sleep with one another. Well, how far did you, total intricacies of details. And the end result of that was they said, David, if you guys hadn't gotten married, and he left it at that. In other words, we probably would have been disfellowshipped if we hadn't gotten married. That's what it came down to. So he said, you'll be on restrictions and reproof a lot longer. And I actually remember apologizing to the one elder. I said, Bob, I'm sorry for whatever trouble I caused. He points to the sky in a Toni Morris-like way and says, don't be sorry to me, be sorry to him. So that was the start of our marriage. And we got, after the convention that summer, the following week, the local needs talk came out, and it was basically about grieving the spirit, and that was geared partially towards us, without naming us, of course, even though people could figure it out, to try and embarrass the living heck out of us, in order to basically put the squelch on okay, if anybody's dating, they can't do it without chaperones, or they can't date without, supervision, kind of a thing. That's where it started, and gradually after that, I would say it was about a year or so after that, we came off of restrictions, off of reproof. The first talk I gave after that they gave to me, I should say, was Jehovah does not tolerate sexual immorality. So if that wasn't salt on the wound,
Oh my God.
that was what they did. And my wife was like, oh my goodness. And like I said, we gradually spiritually recovered, how like a Jehovah's Witness spiritually recovers, getting, because we were never disfellowshipped. This wasn't a reinstatement, but yet we were treated by some as if we were, we couldn't comment at meetings for better part of a year and a half. We kind of like want to raise our hand to comment. We were still fully mentally in the zeal mode of wanting to get back in the good graces.
Yeah. But you know what, David? Like when you think about it, on your wedding day, somebody is asking you these kind of questions. So are we talking about a Kingdom Hall wedding? What kind of wedding are we talking about here?
We went to the Chicago Justice of the Peace downtown. A simple Justice of the Peace marriage, just my wife and I. And then when we got done with that, it was later that afternoon, the elders wanted to meet with us for seeing, quote unquote, how we were doing. And, basically, I self-confessed that, okay, yeah, in the last 6 months, yeah, we've had times where we've kind of crossed the lines again. We didn't actually sleep with one another. We didn't go full-fledged fornication, but we did touch. We did, what they call fondle, kind of like this was around the time the Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky thing was going on in the news. So you had a lot of this language that was coming out that, the American public was, getting used to. And we had circuit overseers, that were quoting some of the things that Bill Clinton was saying, depending on what the word is, and so forth, and referring to this. And then we would even see that in the society's publications, the word pornea. So that's what they were telling us that what we were guilty of technically was pornea, and that put us basically on the ropes again for 1999 into 2000 to start our marriage off.
You know what? You really were in a situation, because like when you talk about how all this started and becoming one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and then you probably had never seen such dysfunction in your life until you got into this group.
No, I didn't. I mean, I had relatively peaceful upbringing. I had, non-Jehovah's Witness parents. I was the only one who walked into the organization on my side of the family. And grandparents married 76 years. My parents were married 26 years until my mom passed. So I had a degree of traditional nuclear family structure, and at the same time kind of being more of a seclusive or quiet person. That played into the vulnerability and susceptibility of this, and then the peer pressure of the culture really laid into me, because it's like, okay, you got to do this to remain a good Bible student, good Jehovah's Witness. If you want to stay in the road for life, the race for life, these are the terminologies that we would hear from the elders, COs, the publications. And then as a ministerial servant, when I got up and gave talks, a lot of times I had to reconvey some of these things. Even as an account servant, if we were short of funds, I would have to say something to the effect that, well, we might have to put out, special requests if we don't, fulfill such and such for the congregation box to pay our bills this month, or something along those lines. So it's amazing how the screws are really tightened the more you get into the organization.
Oh yeah, that is so true. Let me ask you a question. And it's kind of interesting the way it works. When they read you guys off as being reproved, or when the friends realized that you had been reproved, as you look back now, the friends, what do you think the friends concluded actually happened?
That we slept with one another.
Yeah.
And the reason why is they didn't even announce our names, and they didn't say that we were, on reproof, because this was,
was
private reproof.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Different than a public reproof.
Yeah.
Exactly. But when they do the local needs talk, and then they figure out, oh, they were married, they're dating, now they're married, oh, it must be applying to them. They
Yeah,
did the dirty deed. They did the nasty,
Yeah.
That's
that's
how they
exactly right.
develop.
But
That and
what I'm thinking of is when you were at the Kingdom Hall and the sister had to put the napkin over her head or whatever she head covering, so you never thought about showing up late.
a couple times I did, and actually, it's funny you mentioned that because there were some other, brothers and sisters that were on some sort of restriction.
Mhm.
Maybe they were even disfellowship, but they needed to come to the hall for some reason to talk, and they would show up, after the arrangements, so to speak. And sure enough, that's how someone would thought. I think I was a glutton for punishment. I sincerely believe that this was the way to repentance. You know how they teach us about repentance and those steps to repent. I genuinely believe that this was getting my way back to Jehovah, and my wife did too, because we were both under the same restrictions and same reproof mutually. It wasn't viewed as a separate type of thing, even though they at one time interviewed us separately or interrogated us, I should say.
Right.
Uh, it
Yeah,
just that's the way it works.
yeah, that's true.
I think it's just so crazy how they make you feel so guilty
Oh yeah.
and just for some minor infraction. Because I remember when I was in biology and the biology professor said that if it wasn't for the way the chemistry of our bodies and how we were made up, he was like, nobody would be here. And
Right.
so the Jehovah's Witnesses take something so natural and make it so dirty. Because here you are courting. It wasn't like you were dating somebody else's wife. This is the person that you're dating. And then like to kiss somebody or something like that, it's like, oh, wait a minute. This is wrong. You know?
Yeah. And they could see we genuinely loved one another, but they would question that by saying, well, you got to wait until you're after the line. You're wait until after you're married, basically. If you really love her, David, then you'll wait until you're, cross the threshold to do such and such. That was the inferences and direct language, quite frankly, of some of the elders in our judicial committees. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
another thing to just further state, I don't know if you remember this when you were going to the Kingdom Hall, but I remember growing up, and a lot of people were concerned about dying in this system because they told us, or they were teaching, that when you were resurrected, if you didn't live through Armageddon, that you were gonna not be able to be married in the new system. And so it was like nobody wanted to die in this system. And I'm thinking to myself, if you're a human, how are you going to not have sex in the new system? And
Right.
you're a human, you know? That just doesn't make any sense.
They told us we'd be like the angels in the new world.
Yep.
The ones would be
Absolutely.
in a different
Absolutely.
realm, basically in the paradise, and the rest of it was just, oh, Jehovah's going to fix it. Jehovah's going to take care of that. To sweep any sort of concern or doubt or insinuation of that, that's how they sweep everything under the rug. Jehovah will take care of it in His due time.
That's it.
Exactly. It makes no sense. I mean, it just literally, and then they tell you that you're going to grow young. So
Mhm.
you don't know if you're going to grow to be 30, 40, 20. What age are you going to be? What's your status going to be? They make it seem like, you're going to be this version of an individual, but in a new system and live forever and never get old again and just have human tendencies, but you can't act on those tendencies. It
Right.
just doesn't make any sense,
It
you
goes
know?
against what's natural, what comes
Yes, it does. Yeah.
normal and natural to loving, caring couples and humans. It really does. And they stifle any sort of real natural affection. I mean,
Yeah.
even
Good point.
just amongst the brothers, it's
Yeah,
just
good point.
their definition of love is totally convoluted versus what real true love is. It's plastic and fake love, and it's authoritarian love. It's if you don't obey, if you don't comply, you're going to die. That's the gist of it.
Mhm.
That's true.
It's terrible. So now fast forward to like the more modern times of your life. The more modern times of your life. How did you begin to wake up? What was the major crack in your foundation?
One of the first things I wanted to really investigate was the sexual abuse allegations that I had started to hear. Even going back to the 2000s, we had speakers come down to Chicago from Bethel or district overseers that would say things like, be careful what you click on the internet, and if you click on the name Jehovah, you'll be led right out of the truth, kind of a thing. And then we heard one that said, don't watch the Dateline episode or Panorama episodes. So that was mid-2000s, and it wound up being where most of us did not watch that. We were frightened to death of watching that. We were obedient, essentially. So it wound up where I was working at a law firm in 2012. My marriage was starting to crumble as well, and I was working long hours trying to bail us out of a situation. My wife had come down with cancer, anemia, illnesses herself. And one day I'm taking a lunch in my downtown Chicago office, and the Candace County verdict comes up, and it says $28 million, punitive lawsuit judgment. And I was floored. I couldn't believe, against Jehovah's Witnesses, said it very explicitly. And because at the time I was going through a separation, eventually divorce, with all the, what they call unscriptural divorce ramifications that come with that, I didn't really have time with that and with work to fully investigate. But that put that thought in my mind. Okay, this is serious. It wouldn't go to this level if it wasn't a very prominent, pervasive issue. And after 2014, I wound up moving from Chicago to where I'm at here in Wisconsin. The divorce went through a horrible financial loss, foreclosure, bankruptcy, so I needed a fresh start. Plus, I had to watch my father and my aunts. And then gradually, I wound up getting to a point where I got concerned enough to start researching these court cases and investigating. I came across Debbie McDaniel's book, The Out with Consequences, and in line with that, Trey Bundy's investigation. And then I had a job loss where it allowed me some time to actually finally thoroughly research. This was around 2017. And I was absolutely blown away with how systemic this problem was. And basically, the organization was taking the mindset of defending them at all costs, while these predators are running basically scot-free. They're not being reported to the police. They're not, being investigated. They have their own in-house investigations, but God, if they go to the police, some of these ones are actually being threatened with disfellowshipping. And here, I thought all along, my 25 years or so, that this was the most morally upright organization. We stood at corners, inviting people, going door to door and that, soliciting, and telling people that we ascribe to the highest standards of morality, to that pinnacle. But yet they have a problem with this child abuse that's just, it's proportionally as bad as the Catholic Church. So at that point, that's when I gradually started to just drift away from meetings. I'm like, what sense does it make to go to these things where they're saying this, but yet their conduct and what's going on behind the scenes is completely different than what they promote in public? And that's kind of how things gradually, with the rabbit hole, opened up, subject by subject, to see, what the real truth about the truth is.
Dave, let me ask you a question. When you started seeing these things and started basically putting the pieces of the puzzle together, was there anyone that you could actually talk to about this?
Mainly it was through comment sections. I started probing and trying to find out, are these things actually true? I did talk with some of the local elders here, and some of the other witnesses, and generally they would more or less poo-poo it was something that they essentially excused as an isolated incident, and that's not representative of the organization. It's an anomaly, an aberration. So I was trying to figure out at that point, as I was kind of, not going to meetings as much. Of course, they're trying to visit me from time to time at that point, 5-6 years ago, to see what's going on. And I was like, well, this is a serious concern. You guys should be concerned about this. I put it directly to those elders here. So, they would ask me, oh, were you yourself ever abused or molested? I says, no, this isn't about me. This is about the principle of the matter. These are our brothers and sisters. We're supposed to love. We're supposed to protect. I put myself out there, to take care of them. Jesus said it's supposed to be the least of our brothers that we watch out for. They're the victims. They're the survivors. We love them. Where is the love demonstration for this if you're not giving them an opportunity to go to the authorities, or you say, through your speaker, J.R. Brown, who puts out a public message saying, oh, we never prevent them from going to the police, but then behind the scenes, you're turning around and threatening them with disfellowship, threatening them with shunning, using the blackmail tools because they have something behind the scenes that is a lot worse than what it really is. If you guys were honest, why wouldn't you, A, clean it up directly, go through the proper authorities, and then B, make actual genuine apologies, public apologies and private apologies to the ones that have actually been victimized? Because this is who we as supposed professed Christians are supposed to be looking after, is those that are weakest among us. I did this in Chicago when we had people that were getting evicted from their apartments when the rent crisis was happening, and buildings were being taken over by landlords, throwing out some of the friends. We had to move some of the friends late at night, and I was there. I was there as a moving overseer to help them. That's what we were supposed to do. The same principle applies all the more so in something as intricate and personal a nature as sexual abuse of any kind, or domestic violence, or spousal abuse. None of that it shouldn't be a problem at all. If
Right.
it was,
Dave, now what I want to do is that would be another video as well. But I just want to kind of like double click on some of the other things that you may have seen when you were waking up. So you talked about the child abuse cases, and that's what woke you up. Was there anything else that you seen personally about this religion other than just that?
the history, the origins, how we used to talk about origins are so important when it comes to the holidays and other religions. Well, what were our real origins? Were they telling the truth, from headquarters? And then when I looked down the rabbit hole and I researched about Beth Sarim, I had barely heard of Beth Sarim. The only time I heard of Beth Sarim was a little blip in the Proclaimers book before. But then when I researched, it's like, wow, Rutherford actually lived there for 13 years and basically renamed the religion from the San Diego, West posh palatial residence that he was living in. Then he created Beth Shan, which added to it with the 2 Cadillacs that he had. And I never knew about this. And I started looking the rabbit hole further. Policies like disfellowshipping, where did that come from? Or the blood policy, where did that truly come from? What was the origins? Was it actually scriptural like they told us? Or was it something that somebody else came up with? And then I found out, okay, 1947, they actually condemned excommunication. But then Nathan Knorr and Freddie Franz, who was running the show at the time, a few years later, renamed it as disfellowshipping. This was mind-blowing to find the history and origination of a lot of this. And with the blood, I didn't realize, it went through a whole nother chain of rabbit holes where they actually, going back to vaccinations, they had a period of time they were against vaccinations, they were against organ transplants, and I didn't really know the sheer number of ones that had died from refusing emergency medical blood transfusions. Yet here, this is costing people's lives, but they made this doctrine up, and they took something that biblically the Apostle Paul and the Bible writer Luke had no conceptualization of, and they made it essentially a Jehovah's Witness law that you can't get whole blood transfusions. But yet they pander now to these fractions. So the rabbit hole started running real deep after I looked down. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to uncover there, a lot to unpack, because a lot of people, they have one thing that wakes them up. A lot of people don't even have anything. They just don't like the people. And the next thing you know, they're not going to the meetings, but they still believe it. And then, of course, if somebody comes and knocks on their door, says, "Hey, look, brother so and so's here. He's a circuit overseer," they can rekindle their love for the Watchtower. But so in this video, it's just helpful for people that's listening to your story to realize that when you come into something and you don't do your research, or if you see the things that you are seeing or experiencing, you should start to investigate what you're in, because there's a whole lot of stuff that you're going to find out. That's one of the biggest things about us, helping people to share their story, to see that, hey, look, there are people that are born in, raised in, and like you just happen to be, you were still young and impressionable, but you came in, and to show that the witnesses basically got you at the worst or the most down time of your life. When you were at the most down in your life, this is when they came around and they were able to take advantage of that. So yeah, so there's a lot. I mean, when we think about the experiences that so many Jehovah's Witnesses have when they're waking up, everybody comes to the same conclusion. I checked out the history and I began to unravel the teachings, and and then it's like a snowball effect to you unearthing the real truth about this religion.
Exactly. The eye opening just doesn't stop. It's amazing how deep it all runs when you look at the history going back to Russell and the pyramids, like JT alluded to earlier.
Yeah. How do you feel? Like I know how I felt when I found out that this wasn't the truth. How did you personally feel about knowing and learning that you didn't have to do all this stuff that they told you that you had to do?
I was gradually relieved, but I was also quite angry and upset that 20 plus years of my life had been taken, that it was hijacked, or to an extent, I allowed myself in a position to be hijacked, if you will. But then I gradually came to realize, look, I guess I kind of am to a point where I'm philosophical about it all now. I I don't want to hate the witnesses, but at the same time, it's something that I feel I have to be very much on guard, because they are taught to view others essentially as prey, rightly disposed for everlasting life. That's their definition of it. But I went through my stages of both relief, liberty, and upsettedness. It was kind of a roller coaster to get to this point here 4 years later, where have a measure of peace. And I mean, I don't even know what their quote unquote standing or viewpoint is of me, and I really don't care. For a while I did care, but now it's like, we're only under the control and power that we ultimately give them or allow them to have. So it took a long time for me to get those tentacles out and look outside the bubble, and kind of rationalize and calm down about everything, and realize that, okay, if I got duped, hoodwinked, bamboozled, it is what it is. I still got a measure of youth, a measure of future in me, where I can, build my life again after everything that's transpired, and rebuild and move forward. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You brought out some excellent points for all of our viewers and everything that they need to consider and see how you do it. And that's the whole thing. Seeing how people come in, leave, and keep moving. That's really the whole thing.
Yeah. What was one of the first things that you did to put your life back into order after you discovered that this wasn't the truth?
For me, that's where you used to see me a lot in the comment sections. It was actually, to me, cathartic and therapeutic to kind of release my feelings and my defenses, if you will, of what had been turned. So for a while, I was kind of in that mode because time allowed me to be in that mode. Gradually getting myself together, doing things to try and take care of myself where I'm not, stressing myself out about that or having that paranoia of irrational, morbid fear that the organization has, gradually stepping away from that and replacing that with, appreciation for daily life, taking care of myself, eating right, getting some exercise. These are things that, have helped me to move forward and still are, setting goals, setting directions for myself and learning how to become an adult again, because, we were in that arrested development mode. We were stymied and stifled. So much of it was under the control because we believed, Armageddon or the Great Tribulation was coming the day after tomorrow or later this week. And, releasing ourselves from that mindset to getting into a productive and constructive mindset where, hey, we can help one another, help others, that, the world is not wicked as we, were taught to view it. We can mingle, gradually with others, even family members that are non-witnesses. In fact, that's exactly what we should do. That's the humane and conscientious and normal and responsible way to move forward. So that's kind of the steps that I've taken.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you
that's an
also
excellent
said
point.
that you were affected and impacted greatly financially after you had, divorced your wife, and everything was as a result of being a Jehovah's Witness, probably, no doubt. How did you recover financially?
I'm still going through the recovery process at age 49.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's still a road to go. I mean, right now with what I do as an independent contractor, I'm working 6-7 days a week. I had a job loss. I had some other things happen that were not directly witness related. People can lose jobs or careers for various reasons. A career I had at a law firm I thought I was going to have for life, unfortunately, was phased out, as it was for a number of my colleagues. So it's kind of taken me back to where I've kind of had to reapprise my situation. And in the midst of this, in the last 3 years, I lost my wife. She was, technically or legally divorced, but when we were in the organization, we were still viewed as scripturally bound to the marriage. So that had a twist on it for a while. She passed in 2018. I made my one video partially about that. And then my father, just passed last year. He was battling dementia and Alzheimer's. So I kind of had to take some time to just take care of those, family issues, because I think it really affected me, mentally. And yeah, my income got interrupted. It's something where I've been through a bankruptcy before, but I also worked at a bankruptcy law firm, and it's not the end of the world. It's really a fresh start. If a person needs to hit the reset button, Donald Trump did it several times, as did many others, but it's a matter of, if a person has to use certain financial tools in the toolbox for loss mitigation from a devastation situation of, life happens. There were debts involved from the past and such, and things had to be dealt with. So it's moving forward. Taking the steps to move forward, where I'm really at right now, and I've got a ways to go. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
it's
Excellent advice.
it's a
It
path
takes
that
a while.
doesn't stop.
It takes time. It takes
Yeah.
time to get yourself together. Now, what about therapy? Have you ever thought about doing therapy? Have you ever done therapy?
Have not done direct therapy. Like I said earlier, I would say my therapy was, or catharticism was, often, with XJW community, commiserating with, similar feelings and the shock of it all.
Yeah.
But as far as seeing somebody to, relay this, and it's been talked about before, there's very few ones like a Stephen Hassan or a John Jalolich that, or Bonnie Zeman that really understand the dynamics of what we've come out of
Mhm.
in waking up from a cult. But I would say therapy for me is, getting exercise, gradually mingling with more people, getting to know new people that I would have been kind of alienated from before in my
Mhm.
JW mindset. As far as formally seeing somebody, yeah, I mean, I'm open to that. I think it would be good for me to sit down with a social worker or psychologist, as I had even when I was a teenager growing up for some of my challenges. So
Yeah. And the other thing too, David, is when you think about it, sometimes people, they may not need a therapist in some instances, where they might just be able to use a life coach that could just help them to navigate the waters to find out, where they need to be in their life after, being in an organization such as the Watchtower. Because some
Mhm.
people, they may not have been traumatically impacted, but they just need somebody to put them back on the right course of life. Like, I got off this course, I didn't get a chance to get my degree. Did you get your degree eventually?
I did not, because I was in totally different fields, and just my time occupation largely. But it's something I'm considering doing as far as going back to college. It's never too late.
Yeah.
So it's certainly an option. The small town here, they got a nice community college as well as a university. They even started offering an MBA program. So
Okay.
uh, we,
Have you
yeah,
thought about certifications?
possibly. It depends. I mean, like I said, I've already had my CEO license, which I've used for a long time, and with what I'm doing for independent contracting right now, it's actually ramping up quite a bit. So it's keeping me
Good.
quite busy. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's important, but it's also to build myself up, as a person, and as you use the word, to re-navigate myself, so that I can save and build for retirement here, and
Yeah.
take care of myself here, as I move into my 50s here.
Yeah, because you know something too. Did you know that there's some colleges and universities that will allow you to get a certification, take certain classes that will give you a certification, and then you could, enter this work, um whatever the field of certification that you're trying to get, but you can also take those same classes and convert them and use them towards the degree. So
Okay.
they're allowing you to get more mileage from the classes that you take.
Yes.
Like
you know
adult continuing ed and so forth, as well
Absolutely.
life
Mhm.
credit from life work experiences, and
Yep.
morphing and meshing all that, which it should be done, because a lot of employers, or even if you start in your own business, your experience, what you've learned from it and what you can apply is very, very
Mhm.
important.
We
So
did that. We did
Yep.
prior learning
Sure did.
experience.
Sure did.
We got credit for prior learning experience, and just a whole different, when you the way it was explained is, when you are going back to school as an adult, they realized that a lot of people could teach the classes that they had to take. And
Mhm.
so a lot of colleges and universities will give adult education, people that's coming back to school for adult education, they will allow them to apply a certain amount of classes towards prior learning. And I think
okay,
they will allow you to get up to 30 credits for doing that. And
nice.
it's worth it. It's very much worth it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
Worth looking into. So yeah,
Yeah.
I have visited the local community colleges here, so that's probably my next step, is kind of
Do
seeing what
so.
they
Do so.
offer, and growing off of that. So we'll see what the near future holds. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to it.
And not to mention, don't forget to use the credits that you already have.
Right.
Because if you already took some classes, then you can still, keep those classes. It's not like being a Jehovah's Witness where, oh, you pioneered 10 years ago. The pioneer credits that you got from 10 years ago, they're no longer effective or any good. You can't use them. Whereas when you took a class in college, they still give you that credit, years later. You know.
Yeah. You can get the transcripts from the previous college I went to in Chicago, and
Mhm.
transfer that. So
Oh
yeah, it's
yeah. Oh yeah.
not
Yeah.
like the theocratic ministry school, the school you never graduate from, like they used to tell us. Ridiculous.
Isn't
That's
that
true. That
crazy?
is crazy.
But you got any final thoughts that you want to give to the audience about anything?
Well, just kind of wrapping it up, and this can apply to others that are in situations like I've been in the past. Um, if you're in a susceptible type situation, or where everything seems to be crumbling at some point in life, take a step back and also talk with somebody that you can really trust. I think I lacked that at the time I was going through with my mom's loss and so forth. My dad and I weren't real close. Very very small family and such. Somebody that can really objectively be a friend and help you through a trying time, because that can keep a person from getting enmeshed or entangled into a high control group of any kind, because they prey on moments of weakness and vulnerability. And going forward, through just the learning experience of this, I would say you've got to be philosophical about it. I have moments where I've gotten down and depressed, whether it's because of the shunning or lack of communication, but then I kind of turn on the switch mentally where I see the pluses and benefits of not being under that control and that force, and antagonism, which is really beneficial. And to use the time we have to to grow ourselves. Whether it's going back to school, as we talked about, it could be as simple as reading a book, which I've had a chance to do here. Reading a number of different old-fashioned hardcover books about whether it's Jehovah's Witness organization or just sometimes just decompressing altogether. Sometimes we need to get completely away from our background, I think, and engage in recreational activities that are really enjoyable and take the edge off. So that's what I'd recommend for people moving forward. Do what you love. Find your passion and move forward with a purpose that even when things seem really down or moments you seem hopeless, give yourself a chance to reach out. That things do get better despite the troughs and valleys that we've gone through in life and the abuse that we've had. Being part of the Watchtower organization.
Yep, there is light at the end of the tunnel. No question about that. Yeah, I have to say, Dave, I think that you are really the type of person that people need to see, because it's important that people see that whatever they're going through, that is actually the process that you're going to have to go through. There is no easy way out. There is no easy way out of this organization, but you can get out and you can make it. And so I'm gonna tell you, Dave. We had a chance to see a number of your interviews that you've done, and we've said we have got to let him share his story with other people. And I always want to say thanks so much for coming on, man. I mean, just thank you for coming on and sharing your story.
And I thank you both, JT and Lady C, for that opportunity. And hopefully my conversion / deconversion story and the dynamics will help a lot of people as to what's involved, what to avoid, and what to look out for. It benefits a lot of people, hopefully. That's
Absolutely.
my prayer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, because everybody can. We all, as they say, fed from the same trough. We
Right.
all came in through different channels, and
Yeah.
we're all kind of like leaving in the same manner.
Yeah.
So it's really nice to see so many people that have gone through the fire, as it were, but are able to reunite with other people on the other side. I really feel like when we first left this organization many years ago, we didn't have this many people in the Jehovah's Witness community. In fact, we felt like we were just totally out here by ourselves. There was no internet the way we see it today. But now it's like everywhere you look, there's someone you can hang out with. I have a monthly book club with Jehovah's Witness women. We get together, have a great time. We've been doing this since the pandemic. And it's just like, we go from talking about the book to now we always manage to get in the discussion about what our life was like in the organization and how exciting we are to have gone through that fire. And now we're over here
Out.
and we're indulging in educational books that we don't have to study the Watchtower together. We just doing some other things, you know? So it is really nice being able to just reach out and talk to somebody that is from our background and not have to explain to people, you know, why we act a little different than the average person that you see. You know, because when people meet us, they be like, I noticed something different about them. They don't seem like they, you know, like the rest of our friends. They seem a little bit different, you know. But when you get with Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-witnesses, they know where you've been, you know. So sometimes people find that little comfort level when they're dealing with fellow people that's been through the same war, as it were, you know. So again, Dave, we want to thank you so much for being on the platform, being on our program, and we look forward to seeing everyone else in the next episode. This has been Lady C.
And this has been JT.
This program was sponsored by Critical Thinkers.